I get the gavel. So this is a regular meeting of the Peninsula Cities Consortium of Friday, December 10th. We're going to start first with public comment, and then after that with the board's approval. I'd like to move to number 4, our speaker, since we have a special guest speaker, and I think it would be nice to have him get up to bat as soon as possible. So in that vein, I'd like to call for any public comment, and if you would limit your remarks to 3 minutes, that would be great. Thank you. Name and address for the record, please.
Jennifer Pfaff, 615 Bayswater, Burlingame. I just wanted to point out in the Chronicle, in case anybody didn't see it, state population growth slows, which a lot of us already knew. And it points to a number of reasons, but the most important part, I thought, because in light of the plans that high-speed rail and other TOD folks make, always projecting huge growth, there was a section that says, demographers studying population trends in California say the state will not return to the days when large numbers of people move here from other states, and said that policymakers have yet to adjust to that. So my point is we have to be really careful that it's sort of like the tail wagging the dog, you know, on what are our policymakers basing their plans. And they've always done this, and I think it's about time we start looking at what we really have here, and that maybe we're not going to be growing quite as much. So it was just a word of caution we probably all know here, but it was just sort of nice to see that it's been codified in here a little bit. Thanks.
Thank you. And Jen, there's a sign-up sheet on the dais, and the rest of the speakers, if you could, to help our meeting minute taker, if you could just put name and address.
Okay.
Just that helps to prepare the minutes. Okay. Any other public comment? Anybody? Yeah. Thank you, Charles.
Go.
Good morning, Charles Volz from Burlingame. Welcome, Seppi. It's good to see you here. The peer review, the official peer review report has been out, and I'm sure all of you have read it, but if anyone in the audience hasn't read it, it's really worthy of your time and attention. In addition to confirming the numerous previous studies that showed deficiencies in the high-speed rail's plans and management, it focuses on an aspect that has not received a lot of attention, which is that prior to building an effective business plan, you have to have a workable business model, and the term business model is one that hasn't received attention, but like everything else in this roller coaster, the ground seems to shift every 3 to 6 months. Without going into what a business model is, it essentially eliminates a BART-type system in which the system is designed and built by the government and operated by the government, and they say that's not likely. And at the other extreme, it would be a public utility like PG&E, where all the financing and the design and build and operation is by a private entity, and it's regulated by a government authority, and that's not likely. So what they're looking for is a combination, what are now called public-private partnerships, in which at the very least, operations are done by a private entity, and what they really need to do is find funding by private entities. And this becomes absolutely critical when you shift the assumption that they've had for so long that the federal government was going to provide the biggest chunk of the funding. And once you make that an unlikely alternative of the federal government coming in for realistically $20 to $30 billion over the next several years, it changes how it can be paid for, because federal money is the only, quote, free money that's available. Any other money is either loaned and expected to be repaid, or it's invested with an expectation of a rate of return that justifies the investment. So it shouldn't be too difficult for an MBA type person to come up with what is the funding gap. It's probably, my guess is in the range of $40 billion under conservative estimates. And how much would you need to earn to justify that kind of, to pay back that kind of loan or justify that kind of investment? And that translates to what the revenue would need to be and what the ridership would need to be to justify it. And you could reduce to a back of an envelope type calculation with very simple charts. And the reason that's going to be important is that's the kind of thing that congressmen who aren't necessarily financial wizards need to see in order to make the important decisions about whether, as a public investor, this is the kind of thing they want to put more money into. And I'm hopeful that our Peninsula community can provide those kind of simplified financial calculations that show the, at the very least, the very difficult challenge it's going to take to come up with that kind of money and what kind of revenue is going to be required to make that work. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. So, Chair Rich, before you arrived, and welcome.
Thank
we decided that after public comment, we're going to go directly to the speaker, item
Great.
4, so we
Thank
won't
you.
make them wait.
Elizabeth?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Elizabeth Alexis from CARD. Wanted to give a couple of comments. I think just to follow up on the last speaker, though, one thing I would tell you is that Congress is not right now looking at this as a financial investment. They are looking at this as stimulus dollars. They want to do anything at this point, and this will change over time, but at this very moment, they are looking for any way that they will be allowed to spend any dollars doing anything in the United States to try and somehow create jobs to do something else. And this is true in the tax bill, this is true in everything. They are really looking desperately for that. So one of the things I think it's been difficult for people is that they are not, you know, at the FRA and at places within the administration, they're not really looking at sort of financially based assessments and analysis. That's not how they're looking at that. So I think if we have that lens, then we can sort of, what they're doing makes a lot more sense. What I am here to talk about today is that we're going to see a really big hiatus of this project on the peninsula, a really big one, and this is for financial reasons, actually. So just as the last speaker indicated, the costs are really way up from what they've been publicly declared to be, and this is for a lot of reasons, and they were probably higher always, and they were just the way they chose to do the calculations did not sort of show the full costs. For instance, in the Central Valley, one of the segments that one of the options that they were looking at it was something called Option 2, and Option 2 was south of Fresno to north of Bakersfield, and this was 90 miles that they were looking at. Well, a year ago, I mean, we don't even remember this, when the original federal applications, when they were looking at it at a Fresno to Bakersfield segment, they were looking at almost exactly that same segment. It was 98 miles, but it didn't have a Hanford station, so it was really an apples to apples. This is the only apples to apples comparison we really have. And when they applied for the money last year, and this was year of expenditure money, so there's no inflation issues coming into this, it was $1.6 billion was going to be the cost. Well, so 2 weeks ago at the board meeting when we were looking at these numbers, they were either going to be, it's either going to cost $4.3 billion or $3.5 billion. So you have more than a doubling of costs there, and that's true of the entire Central Valley segment. And we think those numbers are, that is probably the number. It's probably double what it was before. When you apply what we know now about what it costs to actually build the system, and then we look at the segments where they haven't done real costing yet in the official budget numbers, and that is actually every place except for the LA to Anaheim segment. And when we apply those numbers, we think the cost is somewhere in the mid $60 billion range. And just the segment from the Y in Central Valley, which is where you turn off from like the 99 to go to San Jose, to San Jose, to get all the way to San Jose. We think that's a $16 billion project. And that project is not going to have any, it's going to have very limited sections with, quote, independent utilities. So you're going to have to really get a big block of money to do that. So they have a lot of challenges in front of them, which is why the CEO, as part of the last board packet, included a map in which he had what he called the efficient expansion path, which was basically just taking the original project, which was supposed to go all the way from San Francisco to Anaheim and then have a little go up all the way to Merced. He took off the part to Merced, and then he took off the part from San Jose North, and then he took off the part from the first LA area station, which is in Silmar in the San Fernando Valley. So he's going to redefine that project. And when we look at the numbers, if you actually just look at the real cost of just doing San Jose to Silmar, it's back to that $43 billion number, which is, I think, the project that he feels like he can deliver and will deliver and what he signed on for. So the project is, it's slowly coming out in the public consciousness. The Merced people are furious because I think they're getting the math now. But it's going to be redefined as San Jose to Silmar. And that's a realistic project. And that is a real project, right? That really is the Bay Area to the LA basin. It's going to be redefined as that. And anything that's not on that critical path is really going to take a back seat. So you're going to see a redeployment of resources. You're going to see, everything is going to go into those sections. And they are really tight on money. So it's, as even at a $43 billion project, right? I mean, and even with the money that they just got, next year's allocation for the entire country for the high-speed rail programs is $1 billion, and it looks like the Northeast Corridor is going to start getting some of that money too soon. So it's a really different, unless there's a major federal commitment, I mean, it's very tough for these guys, and so they are really going to look at what they can do, and they have made a commitment to really do this thing, not just sort of like build something that could be useful to their friends in LA or their friends in San Francisco, but really build the system by starting in the Central Valley. So they are serious, right? Very, very serious. But that means that this segment is going to go on vacation, which is good and bad, right? There are good ways to mothball something and bad ways, right? And that is what I think one of the things that this group and this organization needs to be pushing for, is to be thinking, and I don't even know the right way to do this. I think it's not to push through an EIR and have a stale EIR sitting around and have everybody in limbo for, I mean, we are literally talking now 10 or 15 years this is off, I think. That's our estimate. It's 10 or 15 years now, unless something dramatically changes with the project, which it could, right? I mean, you could have a foreign investor come in and take over the entire thing and redefine what they're doing, but then you'd be in a whole new, I think, game anyway. But if you're going along the current pathway, you're 10 to 15 years off. So you do not want an EIR sitting out there. The second thing, though, is on the other hand, I think we're all starting to learn a lot about local transit. We're starting to learn about our transportation needs. We're starting to look at how all up and down the peninsula we work well together and we don't work well together. We're like the student who thought they had a paper due the next day and the professor's given them an extra week, right? So you can use that time to go to Cancun, or you can use that time to actually write the paper that you knew you could write, right? So I mean, this is your opportunity to start to really plow in, and Caltrain is not going away, but it will if you don't do something about it. None of us, I think, are maximizing the way our public transit dollars could be used. None of us are really in that way. We're sort of reacting to things that happen as far as development, as far as transportation, as far as everything. This is the time, I think, to really work together, to share information, to share knowledge base, and the fact that we are contiguous, right? So we're a network of cities, to really get on the ball. And in Palo Alto, they're doing a corridor study. I know that's great, but even more, like how do we get people to where they want to be, and where do people want to be? I mean, I haven't even seen something that shows me that the cities really understand where the people in their city go, and where the people who are coming to work in their cities come from. So I mean, this is a fabulous opportunity. But as I said, a lot of people, when they're given that extra week, they go to Cancun. So anyway, thank you.
All right. Thanks, Elizabeth. Thanks for bringing back memories of college and Cancun. Any other speakers? Okay. So by the new order, then we will introduce our speaker, and we'll let Mr. Conlon take over from here and educate us.
Thank you very much. I know we've talked about Jean-Claude coming here as much as a year ago, and we were able to coincide his visit to the United States as a vacation with this trip to California. He was in New York already. So Jean-Claude is a member of the board of Eurostar, which is one of the high-speed rail entities that runs from London to Paris and London to Brussels. He's been on that board for 9 years, and he's been involved in the high-speed rail for over 15 years. And he's also been a board member of a manufacturing company of signaling equipment for high-speed rail. And before that, he and I spent many years together as partners in Arthur Andersen and Andersen Consulting. And Jean-Claude and I worked together on a number of occasions, he in Paris and myself in the United States. So I want to introduce Jean-Claude. I think you'll appreciate some of his comments, and I think he's going to put forth some comments that you haven't heard before. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jean-Claude Guez. Thank you.
Welcome, Jean-Claude. Thank you for being here.
Can you hear me now? Thank you. Good morning, everyone. This is going to be videotaped, so I'm going to be very careful about what I say. And as an opening comment, which I don't make usually, but I want to make it here. As Greg mentioned, I am here just because of some piggybacking on my own leisure vacations in New York. I am doing this for free. I am not paid by anybody for this. So I think I am an independent speaker on this whole issue here. And by the way, on Eurostar, I am called in the UK an independent director, which means that I am not getting paid by any of the shareholders. So I have my own views, my own opinion, and I help manage the company. I think what I'm going to do is take you through most of essentially verbal presentation, a little bit of slides on the screen from time to time, but not always. By the end of this meeting, you will have access to hard copies of everything I have presented, including the maps that you will see later. And of course, if you have any questions, as I make my presentation, please interrupt me, and I will try and do my best to answer them. Last contextual point I would like to make, I am not making the comments I will be making here, out of the blue. It comes from, as Greg mentioned, live experience for about 15 years in this business, learning how to make it profitable, which is not a minor endeavor. And what else should I add? Well, you will see as I build what it means. The first thing I would hope we achieve when you leave this room is that you would all have gone through what I would call a paradigm shift of your mental process and references. Because unless you do this, I think confusion will continue here. Oh, I know what I wanted to add as an opening comment. What I'm going to say here is the reflections out of painful European experiences, but not completely out of context. I have read a number of reports here on the project, on some of the counter proposals that have been established. So when I make comments, you can, I'm sure, relate to the situation here in one way or another and then draw your own conclusions. So the paradigm shift I was referring to. A number of people think that running in an HSR business is just like running another railroad service, right? Another Caltrain sort of thing, another Amtrak sort of thing. I want to say, stop here, wrong model. Why wrong model? Because our experience in Europe has been that high-speed trains are successful only if and when they recognize that they are competing with airlines and airlines and airlines and nobody else. All right? And that creating a HSR project is exactly like creating an airline transport infrastructure and airline companies, the exact same paradigm. And let me give you some illustrations of this. Well, first of all, as a supporting evidence of what I'm saying, Eurostar is a registered airline worldwide. You know, and it has an airline code, like United has UA as a code, American has AA as a code, Eurostar has 9F as an airline code. And you can buy tickets on the airline reservation systems of the world. I was the architect of one of them, actually the largest in the world today, called Amadeus. If you want to book Eurostar tickets through the internet, you are using Amadeus resources. Same processes, same logic, same ticketing mechanisms, and so forth. Second evidence of this. You may want to travel from Paris to Brussels on Air France. So you go to the Air France website, and you book your trip from Paris to Brussels, you know, like a champ. And what you actually get is an Air France ticket, which tells you, please show up at Charles de Gaulle Airport, which is way out of the city. And there you will be boarding actually an Air France high-speed train going on the French HSR track networks all the way to Brussels Center HSR hub stations. And I'm saying hub on purpose because the people of the airline business use this term every day. So here is an example in France that, you know, how airlines can be involved. Likewise, you can find very similar examples in Germany. A third evidence of what I am saying is Japanese tourists booking on Japan Airlines a round trip which would go Tokyo, London, Paris, Tokyo, round trip. They would buy, you know, one round trip ticket. But once they have landed and visited London, and want to hop over to Paris, they will actually board my train, the Eurostar train. All right? So this is a dimension that, you know, is probably very new to you here. This is part of the analogy. I will continue because this is fundamental. There is identity in concept between an HSR train set and a jumbo jet. An HSR train set carries 450-some passengers. A jumbo jet does the same. An HSR train set, the long ones, the ones which are called 400 meters long, they carry 900 and some passengers. They cost $120 million a piece, just like a jet. When you want to run your train someplace, you have to get track access rights, and you will be paying track access charges. Well, the airlines, they have air corridors, and they have landing rights to pay, and they have parking rights to pay. Well, Eurostar will have to pay track access, as I said. They will also have to pay berthing rights in the stations, and they will have to pay, say, maintenance of their train sets at maintenance depots. Like the airlines bring their jets to maintenance hangars on the airports, all right? Ticketing, the fare prices. How much would you pay to board an HSR train in Europe? The price is defined along the exact same commercial practices as airlines, which is called in that world yield management. So the price you pay depends on the class you want to travel, when you want to leave, whether you are flexible or not on the timetable, etc., etc. The bottom line result of this is that to go from Paris to London, you could pay anywhere between, say, $40, lower fare available, to 6 times that if you want to be, I was almost going to say flying, traveling in the upper class offering of that service. By upper class, I mean first class, top first class, with all the facilities you could dream of, onboard service, outstanding meals, stewardesses, folding table to work on, power plugs on the side for your laptop, wireless connection to the internet, blah, 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 right? So the whole range, 6 times, more or less. Now, the other half of the analogy, in the airline world, I think we are getting close to realizing that there are 2 animals there. There is the aircraft carrier, the airline carrying passengers in their own aircrafts, and the infrastructure composed of a network of airports owned by XYZ or governments or whatever, and one is the provider of services to the other. The airports are to the service of the airlines, not the opposite, right? In the HSR world, the same analogy works, which means, in Europe, I'm saying again, in Europe, 2 kinds of animals are being considered in this HSR world. The train operating companies, this is the official term being used in the UK particularly. The train operating companies are those people who find financing to create the company, buy what we call the train fleet, maintain them, run them on the tracks, but also, and first and foremost, do all of the commercial activities surrounding it so that they bring on board maximum ridership. Just like the airlines make all kinds of commercial offerings to take you on board the aircraft. The equivalent of the airport's infrastructure in the HSR world is what we call the rail networks operating companies. And these are the guys who find the funding to design, build, own, and operate the infrastructure. That is, the tracks, the electrification, some stations, and we will talk a lot about stations later, because if you think an HSR station is like, a regional train station, again, wrong model. And they are responsible for maintaining those tracks. And this is not a minor endeavor. HSR railway tracks are as delicate to build and maintain as Swiss clocks. Example, the gauge between the 2 rails, the tolerance on error there is 1 millimeter, which means that these rails are not laid out by men, they are laid out by computer-driven, very sophisticated equipment. And these tracks have to be a subject of preventive maintenance every night. So in Europe, no HSR service runs anywhere between midnight and, say, 5 a.m. And that time slot is dedicated entirely for the technicians to manage preventive maintenance and repairs if and when needed. For the same reason, no freight trains run anywhere in Europe on HSR tracks because they would ruin them right away. There is one exception which I will cover later, which is the tunnel under the channel. All right? So this is the introduction, just to wake you up and suggest that you completely change your mindset. I could not describe this better than I just did, I think. What we are going to do is this. First of all, a small comment on the references that I will be talking about on the fly. Of course, Eurostar, for the reason we explained before. But over my 15 years in this business, I have also been involved with the experience of the French railways, and we will see this on the map in a minute. And I am also extremely familiar, because they are a business partner with Eurostar, of another high-speed rail train operating company, I mean this, train operating company, going between Paris, Brussels, Amsterdam, and Cologne in Germany. All right? So these will be my major references. There might be some others as you ask questions, maybe, but fundamentally this is where what I describe will come from. So let's jump to the first map I want to show to you, which is to take you over to Europe for a minute. And I would hope that you can recognize France. Of course, we have the big part of the pie. The UK, Belgium, Holland, and Germany. The map you see here shows, well, first of all, on France. Let me just spend a minute on France alone. This is the map of the French HSR network, countrywide. There is a bit missing because this is not a brand new card map. It is 6 or 7 years old. There is now a track in operations between Paris and Strasbourg and Basel, and it goes to it will go soon to Zurich, International HSR Service. So the blue means real, genuine, high-speed rail tracks where trains run at 200 some miles per hour all along. But the trick to success is that the HSR train sets have been designed in such a way that any place they want, they can exit onto old-style conventional trains, what I like to call countryside trains, to any place in the country. And the whole game has been gradually, but as time goes, to replace sections of these old tracks by brand new sections on different right-of-ways. I'm not saying improving existing tracks. I'm saying building brand new tracks, you know, someplace close to the old ones. And so, for example, a passenger claiming that he's going from Paris to, let's say, Bordeaux here, HSR, actually he's telling a lie. He's actually traveling full high speed until Tours, and then continuing on the old tracks until Bordeaux. But he does not notice as a passenger, because this is a completely seamless transition, although the train slows down. It slows down to something like 120 miles on the old tracks. But the underlying trick behind all of this, above and beyond the train's design, is the fact that all these lines, and I mean all these lines, are electrified. And you know, even if they were electrified with all standard electric systems, the trains would manage to accommodate to this. If that was not the case, I think France would have been in bad shape, because they could not have used this trick of exiting onto old tracks to some destinations, which would have been too expensive to build initially, at least. All right? So electrification is absolutely vital to be able to play this game. Now, Eurostar. There we go. Eurostar has a Anglo-French and an Anglo-Belgian component. The Anglo-French component is London to Lille to Paris. London to Lille to Paris. The Anglo-Belgian side is London to Lille to Brussels. And there is sort of a Y-shaped connection here. There is also, but it's not on the map, a Paris to Brussels HSR connection, but this is not Eurostar. This is another company by the name of Thalys, which I mentioned before. And they have nothing to do with one another in terms of legal status, financials, etc. Nothing to do with one another. They're only business partners. So this Eurostar trains runs on French HSR tracks until the French coast up here. It runs on UK-built HSR tracks from this place on the UK coast to here. And under the channel, it runs in the component of the infrastructure called Eurotunnel. Eurotunnel is a standalone legal entity, entirely privately funded, which owns and operates a tunnel under the water, which is about 30 miles long. Journey time is exactly 20 minutes. And it has one track going each way, north-south and south-north. Only 2 tracks in total. During the day, on those tracks you see circulating Eurostar and Eurotunnel-owned trains, which go from the French bank to the English bank of the Channel, and only that. So they are shuttle trains in a way, which carry either passengers and their own cars or trucks. All right, and this is during the day. But these are not considered as freight trains, they are light trains. At night, with the exception of some slots which are closed for maintenance services, at night, what you see circulating in the tunnel is slow speed, imposed slow speed freight trains. And today there are 2 freight train companies using the channel, the French railways and the German railways. The French railways bring their freight trains through countryside tracks, not HSR tracks, all the way up to the channel entry. Likewise, the German freight trains, they cross Germany, Luxembourg, Belgium on old-style tracks in the countryside, and they connect right at the entrance of the tunnel. And likewise, at the other end of the tunnel, once on the UK side, they exit the tunnel, are not allowed to run on HSR tracks, and so they move immediately over to old-style tracks in the countryside. But all of them, by regulation, are electric. Diesel is absolutely prohibited in all tunnels in Europe, by the way. All right? So this facility here, the tunnel under the sea, is actually operating for the moment for 1, 2, 3, 4 railway companies, train operating companies. There will soon be a 5th one, because when the when the Worldwide Olympic Games in London start in 2012, there will be a German-owned and managed HSR train service from London to Brussels, so competing head-on with us, and then from Brussels going up north to Holland and going east to Germany. So by then, 5 train operating companies will be sharing the HSR tracks in Eurotunnel. And they will be sharing, and the 2 HSR passenger companies, Eurostar and the German railways, will be competing head-on on this track in the UK. But that's not the end of the story, because now I want you to look at this in a magnified way. So I have a second map for you, which is this one, and it is an absolutely fascinating story. Forget the upper half, which is a free gift from me. It's the London subway system map. You don't care about that, but you would care about this, the bottom half, which shows what happens on the UK side once the trains have exited the tunnel here. In the old days, if any of you have taken Eurostar in the past, you may have seen that you were traveling in the countryside on very shaky old rails with a 3rd electric rail on the side, and going through the southern dirty suburbs of London, landing into a station the name of we never understood could ever exist, called Waterloo. But that was the game, you know. Dear Brits, Waterloo Station was our hub station. So we have changed that. It's now another one, and we forget about history. But when we were forced early on to do this, well, we were using the trick I was describing for you before. We had HSR trains running full speed on the French side and converting onto an old carrier mode on the slow-speed English tracks. So, you know, the government, the British government, under pressure, but also under commitment made by Margaret Thatcher when this thing here was built, gradually and slowly invested in creating this HSR line here, which actually was opened in 2008 and which took 6 years to build. 6 years to build. Now let me give you the size of it, and you will maybe feel familiar with something on your minds here. This thing is roughly 70 miles long. Journey time from here to there is exactly 30 minutes, full speed, HSR speed. It is literally a straight line. You see two stations here. I will comment this in a minute, but you see two stations. Actually, there is a third one here where my plus sign is, which exists but is not commercially open yet. It is invisible because it is entirely underground, and it will be used as the hub stations for the Olympic Games and later on to serve new quarters of London that are being completely rebuilt with the occasion of the Games. All right? From here to here, everything is what I call open air. So it's tracks that you can see, except when they have to go into tunnels to go through small hills. But otherwise, it's all open air, either at grade or in trenches or in short length tunnels. Right? From here, there's this very point here. Actually, when the track has to cross the Thames, which is a fairly wide river, the option selected was to have the train go under the Thames. So there is an under river tunnel here. Once we exit from the other side and get close to the city limits, Eastern London, Metro London city limits, the train disappears. It enters a tunnel which begins here and finishes at the station, never surfaces. You don't see it, you don't hear it. It is about 20-some miles long. It takes about 15 minutes to ride, and people are happy. Right? Now, there is a toll to pay for this. And the toll to pay is that the construction of this tunnel here, which allows high-speed trains to run under, has led to a complete total cost, construction cost of this line here, London to the coast, of roughly, this is ballpark number, roughly $10 billion US. Entirely government funded. So it would be if we stayed there, we would say, this is just like another usual story. Not true here. Because the UK government, the latest one, Mr. Cameron's government, is, as you know, in very tough financial situation and times. So anything the government can do to recover money, they will do. And what they did here a few months ago was to put this business here, the business of the HSR rail tracks operation, not the Eurostar business, the business of operating the infrastructure, the rails and the stations. They put that on public auctions. I think you call these fire sales, something, right? Fire sales. The winner being the one who has the biggest check on the table. And it was sold unbelievably fast. And it is now the ownership of a, listen to me, a Canadian pension fund. A Canadian pension fund. All right? Why did these Canadian guys think this would be worth doing? Because they have seen how successful Eurostar has been using this pathway. They know that the Germans are coming, and when the Germans are coming, it's a serious matter. And there might be others in the future. Yes? Well, good question. $5 billion. So yes, I mean, the other side of the coin was a $5 billion write-off by the government. but nonetheless. And this business, as defined now, as owned by the Canadians, is profitable. Okay? What else could I say? The stations. When we started, operating this, we used to stop here and here on the way from Paris to London. And we have gradually reduced and almost closed some of these stops because we have now a partner, UK-only, high-speed train operating company called Southeastern, which is running what you call here baby bullet-like trains on the HSR tracks. And they go from London to here and backwards, and they stop at these two stations. But they are smart enough also to have made sure that their trains can exit any place and run on the commuter type old style tracks anywhere here. So they actually offer a combination of high speed commuter train services and conventional commuter train services in the same train sets. Again, seamless move over. So we are now working in full partnership with them, and they have become the feeders of passengers from here and here into what we call our Eurostar hub station in London. We don't stop anymore, literally. And this leads me to a point I have not made yet. You agree, I hope, that HSR trains compete with airlines. Well, this is a little bit too wide of a statement. They compete and should compete with airlines only if and when the door-to-door journey time for the passengers switching over to trains are somewhere above 1 hour and somewhere around maximum 2.5 hours. Okay? Below 1 hour, this is called commuter trains. This is not the business of HSR trains. Not the business of HSR trains. Above 2.5 some hours, it is definitely the job of the airlines because they win on the door-to-door journey then. They win on time. Anything else in between, we win on time, reliability, punctuality. 90% of our trains dock at the destination station on time within plus or minus 5 minutes. Give me an airline which can do this. This is regardless of weather conditions. Regardless of weather conditions. Because the drivers on those trains do not look outside the window to see the signals on the side. They run too fast to see them. I have been on those, I can testify. The signaling system, the famous thing we mentioned earlier, the electronic signaling systems, which couple devices on the tracks and devices on board the trains, display to the driver a dashboard, visual dashboard with signals being visible, but not the signals, a meter ahead, 1 or 2 or 3 miles ahead, because of the speed of the train. All right? So this is how we achieve punctuality. and then, of course, service on board, which does not compare anymore with any of the airlines. So remember this time slot, absolutely fundamental criterion. Okay? And I think what it leads to is to understand that in the end, HSR train operating companies have to become business partners of anybody who can feed the HSR hub stations with ridership. So, car drivers, local train drivers, long-haul buses coming to the stations, airlines, as I said in the opening, at both ends of what we call hub station city pairs. But between the city pairs, by God, your mission is to run as fast as you can. And as fast as you can means, whenever possible, like here, straight line pathway design, flat tracks layout, which means if at all possible, no hills. Actually, it's not really possible, but very low inclination hills, something like 2% maximum. In Germany, because of their landscape and their density, they have gone up to 3% slopes, which has led them to run their train slower than the French trains, for example, and which, funny enough, has also prevented French trains from going to certain German cities because of too high hills, too steep hills going into the city. So just for the fun of it. What else what should I say before we open to a Q&A session? Greg, help me. Anything that you think should be mentioned?
The significance of the 1 hour rule.
Yep.
In California, that would extend beyond San Jose from San Francisco. So it'd be, in theory, no stops from San Francisco to Highway 5. Just follow that rule, literally. And they didn't start out with that rule, but that's where they wound up. Because of the economics.
Okay. let me address the economics for a second. Now that you have heard me saying that there are two key players in projects like this, the rail networks operating companies and the train operating companies. Let's talk about funding and finance and whatever else for a minute. First of all, these two types of entities have, by construct, very different strategic time horizons. A rail network operating company has to have a, say, 50 years or some strategic time horizon. A train operating company probably would have a 30 years time horizon. Why do I say 30 years? Because this is the life expectation of a train set. After 30 years, you junk it, it's dead. And it has to undergo, at midlife, which is happening to us now, at 15 years old, a complete overhaul. So you just dismantle entirely the train, check all the pieces, rebuild it, and off it goes for another 15 years, but then dead. So different time horizons. And if you bundle all of this together, you just no longer know exactly what you are talking about. Sources of funding. In Europe, again, I know of no example where the funding of infrastructures like this could be an only private investment. Absolutely no cases. There has always been significant government subsidies, and when I say government subsidies, I mean from the very top to the very bottom of those who are somehow concerned with this. In Europe, it's from the European Union budgets all the way down to the local towns' budgets. So you could translate this to what's happening here. How do these rail network operating companies make money? Very simple. They charge to the trains running on them track access charges. And these are negotiated commercially, just like airlines could negotiate with you as a passenger. This is called yield management. So there are companies who get a better deal than others because they are willing to pay more than others. For example, time slots. Just like on airports, some companies pay more to get better landing slots, time-wise. The other half of the player types, the train operating companies, they have to fund the purchase of the fleet. They have, and then in terms of, and amortize it. And then in terms of operating costs, they have to pay track access charges, a fairly heavy burden. They have to pay train maintenance, and they have to pay commercial ticket distribution services, right? These, and of course, then they have to pay service on board, but let me forget the last one. In this industry in Europe, broadly speaking, if you were looking at the P&L of a train operating company, you would find that its fixed costs are of the order of 60% of the total costs. So it doesn't take much in terms of commercial strategy or design of where you would stop or not stop to be in the red rather than being profitable. Very high sensitivity there. Sources of funding, as I said, for the rail networks owners, probably, if not always, significant subsidies. For the train operators, it is conceivable that these be entirely privately funded, as long as they have enough freedom in terms of managing their own businesses to decide which of the resources over the infrastructure they want to use and those that they do not want to use for commercial reasons. So the decision on stopovers is a major decision for the train operating company. It should never be the decision of the infrastructure builders. Okay?
Passenger count. What passenger counts are relevant?
Okay. I will get that to there in 1 second. We are going to talk about ridership and passenger counts and so forth. For the sake of information, our service, the Eurostar service from London to Paris and London to Brussels today has swallowed 80% of the total market share, that is passenger traffic, between Paris and, on the other side, Brussels or London, including airlines, of course. Including airlines. The airlines have less than 15% of the market share in total today between those destinations. Less than 15%. The rest is miscellaneous transport media, like people taking their car, going over and who used in the old days to take a car ferry crossing the channel and things like this. Minor. So the lesson is, if you want to estimate proper ridership forecasts, the very first thing you need to have and be damn sure that it is a reliable number is total air traffic between your city pairs, your hub station city pairs, right? Once you have this, you can guesstimate. It doesn't take, MIT doctors to find this. Once you have these numbers, you can guesstimate that in the early days you might be able to bring to yourself 30%, 40% of the air traffic, depending on how good commercially you are, up to the kinds of thing we have now achieved, 80% of the total air traffic. And once you have reached that percentage, I mean, it's almost unrealistic to expect that you are going to increase market share. All you can hope about is create new additional market volume that everybody is going to share. So, the lesson is really that thinking that people who live far away may switch to another mode of transport just because the HSR train exists is wrong. It will not happen. Yes?
When you look at the numbers between San Francisco, the Bay Area, the LA, Southern California area, the numbers given for air traffic are anywhere between 8 and 10 million passengers a year. And you're saying that the ridership then would be 80% of that in the first year or something like that. And we are being given the numbers that they are indicating their expenses and revenues on are 43 million passengers a year today. Now, how can you reconcile that kind of a number? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. I started this off by saying that the ridership numbers on air traffic today between the Bay Area and the Southern California communities are somewhere between 8 and 10 million passengers a year. Those are numbers, reliable numbers. The situation is the High-Speed Rail Authority is talking about 43 million passengers a year, which is the kind of financial estimates that they are using. Now, even if you got all of those, you'd be looking at 8 million passengers a year, and the numbers that they're predicating their financials on are 43 million. It doesn't seem to make any sense to me.
Well, first of all, on the air traffic numbers, I have heard here all kinds of stories ranging from, as you said, 7, 8 to over 15. And I don't know, what judgment to make on this. I mean, the sources have to be double-checked. The airlines have the number for sure, but that's the number one double-checking I would make.
Well, the numbers that I know of came from independent databases, and I think they were pretty well. In fact, and they are the high-speed rail authority. The high-speed rail authority numbers are, I guess, even validated by them.
Yeah, but I mean, you know, being willing to remain independent before I would discuss those numbers, I would like to understand what their sources were, really.
Yeah, Jean-Claude, do you want to keep presenting, and then we'll get question and answer after that?
Okay.
Try to hold the questions until you're done.
Actually, I think we are pretty close to conclusion. I think the message is, I'm not claiming by any means that what we have done in Europe you should be cloning here, because I fully realize that the context is different. But nonetheless, I mean, the basics of success for this business, everywhere I have seen it and practiced it, is what I described here. So then, you know, you can think about it and draw some conclusions related to what might be fine-tuned about what is being done here. But it's not for me to say I have not spent enough time by any measure on understanding the details underlying the situation where the project is here today.
Do you have any questions up here? Okay, a couple questions.
Mr. Guez, thank you very much for coming here.
You're welcome.
I'm certainly delighted and honored to meet you. I had a couple of questions. Just basic political question relates to how the board members are appointed to that Eurostar board, which you are one of them.
Okay. We now enter UK governance for a second, but it is interesting to listen to. A UK board these days has a structure which doesn't resemble what you have in the US typically. It has what is called executive and non-executive and shareholder representing directors, 3 types. It also has at the head, actually it's 2 heads. The chairman of the board, which is called independent chairman of the board, who is not connected in any manner to any of the shareholders. And there is a CEO, who is the highest ranking executive employed by the company, right? And the chairman of the board is the custodian, if you will, and also the ultimate approver of the company strategy. And he is then also responsible, like any other board chairman, for execution of the strategy under proper conduct, you know, complying with governance rules, tax regulations, whatever else, and checking that all major risks for the business are properly dealt with, identified and dealt with. So the board is composed of the independent, we say non-executive in the UK, independent non-executive chairman. Non-executive meaning that he has no hierarchical responsibilities over anybody except the CEO, right? The CEO, the CFO, and the commercial director in the case of Eurostar, because commerce, you know, marketing and sales is vital for this company. Then there are the shareholder representatives. This company is owned 55% by the French National Railways, therefore by the French government, 40% by a special entity which was created in the UK, which is actually a subsidiary of the Department for Transport in the UK, which owns 40% of the company. And then the remaining 5% are owned by the Belgian National Railways, SNCB, which is also government-owned in its own country. So there are 2 directors from SNCF, 2 directors from the UK entity I described, 1 director from the Belgian Railways. And then there are 3 independent non-executive directors like me, who are selected from the market by headhunters, typically are proposed to the board by headhunters, and not connected in any manner whatsoever with the shareholders. Okay? And these people have, again, hierarchical responsibility over the CEO only and nobody else. Is that a proper answer?
Definitely.
Thank you.
how did you guys manage to get the airlines to accept that Eurostar is an airline? In U.S., if we come tell HSR is really an airline, there would be an incredibly economic war over here, because they're going to become threatened that you're taking customers from them. How did you guys balance this?
We didn't. We just fight with them and gradually win because we have a better offering than they do. I mean, they just could not do anything against it, legally speaking.
Okay. My last question is, we do care about community input and so forth. How did you guys manage to do all of that and have the community consensus and participation?
It was a very, very long and painful process. Because the way it works is that in this case, the governments initiate the projects and start by proposing potential network layouts, stopping here and there or bypassing X and Y. And of course, along the tracks, there are people who are very happy and people who are not happy at all. So this led to tough political negotiations and, of course, connected issues of funding, who would accept or not to participate to what. But in the context of European governments, of European countries, the governments for infrastructure projects, in the end, have the last say. So if and when negotiations last for too long with parties against these projects, at a point in time, government can say, now game over, and this is what it is going to be, right? Likewise, if there is a need to acquire new rights of way, there is a special process in Europe called expropriation, by which the future rail network operating company will be allowed to purchase those pieces of land not at market price, but at a price set by the government. So it's a big difference with here. I fully recognize this. Preemption rights and authority recognized at the top, and legal context where it is not as easy in Europe to sue anybody than it is here.
Thank you.
Can you characterize quickly the relationship between the regional train operators and the high-speed or the HST operators when it started, and how that relationship worked?
Very good question. One rule of the game to make HSR profitable as soon as you can was in Europe, and again, there is enough political power to enable this, that as soon as an HSR service is opened on a stations hub city pair, I am using my words carefully here, on an HSR stations hubs city pair, the regional train services to and from the same locations disappear overnight. So all that traffic is converted onto the HSR trains the next day. But remember what I said, it is worthless to do this for city pairs where journey time is less than an hour, and it is worthless to do this after over 2.5, 3 hours. So there are lots where over transportation means at their own place. But in this 1 hour to 2.5 hour slot, please do not transform your HSR trains into commuter trains.
Please. Excuse me.
Jean-Claude, I think in San Jose, for instance, if the train took the one hour rule, it wouldn't stop there, but high-speed trains could originate in San Jose and go to Los Angeles. But trains that originated in San Francisco would go to Los Angeles and not San Jose. Just like an airline would fly from SFO to LAX, but they wouldn't stop in San Jose anymore as an airline, and they wouldn't as a train. So train service would be available from San Jose to LAX and San Francisco to LAX, but not San Francisco, San Jose, LAX.
But if we carry this logic forward, then there's all the other operators that have to transform in that beginning. right? In the beginning, where you had freight that was diesel, you know, and you had all the different types of train mechanisms, and they all had to create some kind of alliance, some kind of funding mechanism for them to change.
Yes.
How did that happen?
Well, in most cases, these local train operating companies, one way or another, are subsidized by regional governments, you know, provinces, cities, more or less like here. So these guys have a say also in terms of ensuring that, you know, proper flexibility and and complementarity with these new services takes place.
Hi, thank
Hello.
you for coming. It's great. I had two questions. One, there's nationwide regulation of equipment, it sounds like, so that everything interoperates? Is that correct or not?
I would dream that this would be true. The answer is it's a terrible technical chaos because of history. It's a chaos nationally, and it's a chaos Europe-wide. It's a chaos nationally because, you know, depending when these tracks were laid out, I mean, the sort of equipment available on them differs. Including signaling is the number one. The second one is the technical characteristics of electric power. Just to give you a feel, even in France, there are some locations where the power is always through catenaries, always. There are places where it is 1,000 volts AC, DC, I mean, 1,000 volts DC. On the HSR tracks, it is 25,000 volts AC. So all of these trains are, in effect, huge, heavy, rolling electric transformers. They can adapt to any combination of current, style, signaling, etc. So they are also an incredible computerized system to adapt the signaling to the place where you are now running. The same is true, and even worse, when you cross country borders, because the railway world in those various countries never talk to each other, never, ever. So what is happening now is that the European Union has said, you know, enough is enough. We have decreed, and this has been one of the European Commission directives, that the future standard is going to be something on signaling. And this is where my other company works, the Invensys company. This signaling system has a name. It is European-wide approved. It's called ERTMS. ERTMS. And gradually, each country is equipping its lines, beginning with HSR lines, but then moving over to the old style lines as well, with this ERTMS signaling system, which is compatible across countries, and which is understood by all recent and future train sets which will run on those networks. Yes, one single European standard.
So moving forward, though, the actual high-speed rail trains, is there a standard for them? I realize that, you know, you have the legacy systems, but there's still no standard between countries or inside countries for the actual, it's all regional?
No, there is, well, the standard is that they all resemble each other, but they are all very complicated because they have to deal with these various local standards. So you take a French train or a German-made train or a Japanese-made train, in this case, the commuter service, which I was mentioning, is high-speed trains manufactured by the Japanese company called Hitachi. All of these trains can be fed power-wise and signaling-wise by whatever system is there where you are.
So it's up to the trains to be...
The train adapts.
Yeah, okay.
The train adapts,
And then
yes.
one other, I kind of know the answer to this because of what you said, but is there any regulation for fares within countries?
No.
Or is it also
Free competition. This is a European Union mandate, free competition.
So the fares could go up or down depending on...
Anytime we want. Our regulator, in a way, is how do the airlines behave.
Right.
You know, if they lower some offerings, we lower our offerings. If there are some, say, low-cost offerings like EasyJet, well, we have an EasyJet-like offering, etc. We just copy each other all the time. And whoever does it the fastest is in a slightly better shape.
Kathy?
One quick quick question. From what I understand, the long-term plans of the High-Speed Rail Authority for the LA to San Francisco line is to only perhaps have 2 trains a day meet the 2-hour and 40-minute time, which would be nonstop, and then everything else would, there's, I think, 9 or 11 stations along the way, more than that, that they would be stopping, would sort of be the milk run of high-speed rail. And it sounds like what you're saying, that makes no financial sense to do that.
Well, I'm not going that far, but if, say, you have 6 or 7 stations along the way, it should be the train operator decision in due course to decide, you know, how often it stops over at each of those stations and whether they should be stops in a row, or like Greg was mentioning on an earlier example, pick 1 or 2 among those and ignore the others. But another train later during the day might stop at those stations that you have not served the first time around.
Is the point being that best case scenario, San Francisco to LA is 2 hours and 40 minutes.
Yeah.
Everything else will be longer, which doesn't fit into the 1 hour to 2.5 hour model. Do you know, as it being
unless you can do 2 things: minimize the number of stops. I mean, this is really one of our fundamental success factors. And unless, second, the track's layout can be such that you can reduce journey time as much as you can, in terms of how you lay out the tracks. You know, the more straight line they are, the faster you run, the better time you get out of the journey. But it means expenses from an infrastructure standpoint.
So, and just a last question, why hasn't High Speed Rail hired someone like you to give them advice?
I guess I could not say. I mean, I have no idea.
I think the things that you've said, I mean, my head's spinning because you said change your paradigm, and everything you say makes sense, and it has no reflection of what we've been hearing for 2 years. So it's just amazing to me.
Is that they all have gone to France, they all have gone to Japan, they all have gone to study.
Yeah, but they haven't spent 15 years immersed in it. So I think you have to recognize that. But it's interesting that a Frenchman would come to the United States and teach us that competition and capitalism is the right to build this system, and not socialism that the French have given up.
Well, I think they go to see what you do, so they come here to do exactly the opposite. That's why people are outraged.
Pat.
You know, I think that, I mean, your comment is very relevant to one dimension which I heard yesterday. I heard that the project might be considering creating their own signaling systems here. I mean, all I can say is I don't understand why, but I mean, I don't know the details. So again, just a question.
You mentioned that that the Chanoa is 2 tracks.
Yes.
Is everything else 4, or is
no?
there
Everything is. Oh, good questions.
And also, how many trains per hour?
Yes. Yes. Well, you gave me for another 30 minutes of comments here, but I will be short. 2 tracks everywhere. I don't know of any situations where there are 4 tracks. 2 tracks everywhere. Why isn't there 4 tracks? Well, first of all, because in essence, you understand that on those tracks we want to run as fast as possible, so anybody which might slow down the traffic is not welcome. But there is another reason. 1, 2 rail tracks thing like this on the map can carry, when it is saturated, and saturated means spacing the trains in an optimal manner using this ERTMS signaling system. It means that the line is saturated at a traffic of 36 million passengers. So until you reach 36 million, you are pretty safe. What do you do once you have reached 36 million? This is beginning to happen to the French railways on the HSR link between Paris and Lyon, where they have done one thing and they are soon going to undertake a second thing. The first thing they did 6 years ago, in anticipation of this saturation, was to have one of the train manufacturers invent, I mean, this was the first time ever on Earth, invent double-decker high-speed trains. But one of the criterion for high-speed trains is to be as light as possible on the tracks. So these trains are made almost like aircrafts with very light metal architecture. A mix of aluminum and titanium and things like this. So that's the first thing which somehow relieved for some time the congestion point. The other thing which is now being underway, but only at the planning level so far, is build 2 more tracks on the existing right-of-way. But none of this has started yet. Did you have any? Number of trains. Okay. You can easily calculate this. The spacing, the minimum spacing between 2 high-speed trains on the tracks is 5 minutes. So it's roughly 12 per hour each way. So it's 24 per hours in total.
Is that what they actually have? Are they running that number of trains?
I'm sorry,
Running that quantity of trains? Are they running 12 per hour?
Yes, on some segments, like Paris to Lille. This is the case now. Why? Because on that Paris to Lille link, you see Eurostar, national TGV trains, Thalys trains, and I'm probably missing a 4th one. I mean, a crowd of high-speed train operator companies, all being interspersed, and then paying different prices for access path, depending on the time of the day.
And the maximum number of passengers on the track? 36 million?
Per annum. 36 million per annum, yes.
Okay. Any other questions up here? Okay. Public questions?
Yes.
Need a microphone. Yeah.
The first is just a remark. I lived in France and in Germany in the 80s, and I don't know if much has changed, but it's just the density issue. First of all, I don't find it even comparable to what we have in California. That's the first item. The second is the tolls on the roads, which we don't have, which make, of course, train travel much more attractive, as well as the connectivity, which we also don't have, the network, which is incredible in Europe, and it has always been subsidized. So that's just a historical, huge difference to me. Then I have just some technical questions. Very interesting 2 tracks. I also wanted to ask, because you said that they were at grade, then do you have then these, I'm sorry, I forgot the name of the gates, these gates, the quad gates all everywhere?
Quad gates.
Yes. I guess so, yeah. I don't know the technical, forgot all my French, but then you don't grade separate, obviously, everywhere. And you just use these gates, these fancy gates. The grade separation here, where they're saying they have to have grade separation to make it work.
Hold it on.
Okay.
I want to comment on this right away.
Yes.
Between Paris, on any of the HSR tracks, city pairs, layouts, nowhere is there a crossing at grade between the tracks and anything else, particularly highways and roads used by cars or trucks. None whatsoever. So any of these logical crossings are dealt with by operating different grades, and there are no gates of any kind anywhere.
Well, this is the confusion. I'm not understanding that. So, but you're saying it's at grade, but then you're saying when a road comes, it goes under.
The road.
A road.
Not the train. The road.
The road goes under.
Under or
yeah.
over, but not the train.
Right.
It's
so
all
your
grade separated. Yep, all of it.
It is grade separated then. They're always grade separated.
Everything.
Is that what you're
Yes.
saying? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Even out into the country?
Even out to the country.
Okay. All right.
Yes.
That was it. And then none of these big elevated aerial structures for the train, or yes? That they're proposing here, these elevated...
I honestly do not know of any. There may be a few very rare examples of structures like this going into just a few cities, but by all means, this is not the model there.
Because you're talking about 1 millimeter of tolerance.
Yes.
We have earthquakes here. I mean, it's...
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Well,
anyway.
there is on tolerance, there is one country which has the expertise about earthquakes, and only one. It's Japan. So the Japanese engineers know how to build HSR structures that would resist, quote unquote, earthquakes to an extent. Yes.
I just would like you to comment on security on the rails, and also how the tracks go through residential areas most commonly.
Yeah. Let me take the last question first. How do trains go through communities? In most cases, they are using trenches. In most cases, they are using trenches. So that they are lower than, grade level, and they cannot be seen, even if it is not covered. And also the trenches have the advantage of containing sound. So people on the sides would not hear it like you can hear those running next to your beautiful houses here. Sometimes tunnels like this, but this is the largest and most expensive case I know of. Security. Well, to me, this has multiple ramifications. There is security from the standpoint of what you would mean by security when talking about airlines. And I would say that there are only a few HSR services, even if international, who are implementing security measures similar to the airlines, except Eurostar. And this is because of two things. First of all, the tunnel under the channel, which would be a horrible place to have, a bomb blow up of some kind, terrorism of any kind. And second, the UK own border regulations. They have their own, border surveillance agencies. And the end result is that Eurostar is submitted to safety measures more stringent than airlines. But they do this in a dynamic manner, which you might have never heard of, which means that every morning our headquarters get information fed and filtered and digested from the FBI, the CIA, the TSA, their equivalent in the UK, their equivalent in France, their equivalent in Spain, in Germany, in all over the world. And there is a central headquarters in Europe which tells, and this is government managed, European community managed, and these guys tell us every morning the danger might be coming from here or here or here, and of this nature. And then we have sort of immediate mandate to implement, in some cases, additional safety measures to deal with that. However, we have been able, with 15 years now of experience, to optimize the processes, the checkup processes, and preventive safety processes, so that we can offer a service that no airline can compete with. The latest possible boarding check-in time before boarding the train on Eurostar is 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Okay? Now, domestic trains, the TGV trains running from Paris to Lyon, Paris to Bordeaux, they have no particular onboard security measures, but they have their own police patrols, which at night, and again related to track maintenance, they patrol along the tracks to double check if there are no devices buried under the ballast or things like this. But it's more of a randomly decided patrolling system than something systematic. It would be far too expensive.
Jean-Claude, maybe you could talk about the commutes between Lyon and Paris and the frequency of people commuting.
Yes. One of the consequences of opening HSR services is that, it's just like in the old times when the first railroads were created, and you know this very well here, since you invented the first transcontinental railway service from Sacramento to Chicago. What it does is, all along the path, it generates additional economical development. You know, businesses coming next to the track wherever there is a stop, plus in the main hubs. And in the main hubs, what is happening is that people all of a sudden live in one place but work in the other place. Like you have people living in London and working in Paris and vice versa, and they commute every day. They commute every day. Likewise, Paris to Lyon. You have people living in Paris, working in Lyon, or living in Lyon, working in Paris. And this big, I mean, to some extent for them it's some sort of a commuter train for them, with the difference that they work all along. So if they have a 2-hour ride each way, they work 4 hours, as if they were in the office. So they don't have, I mean, their working time is not 8 to 6 in the office. It is 8 to 6, everything included, and among which 3 or 4 hours on board the train. So it's another paradigm shift, mobile office.
Can I think one thing that's got everybody confused is that it's not obvious that what we're building between San Jose and San Francisco are actually high-speed rail tracks. The intention is only to build it to 125 miles per hour. So in some ways, we could just be saying we're finally building a conventional rail.
Bullet train.
Right. I mean, just this section. So I think that a lot of these things that we're the beginning or the end. We're more like the Paris to the edge of Paris is not high-speed rail tracks, right? And so different rules to some extent apply, and I think that's got everyone a little bit. Yeah. And that's what's confused. I mean, but then again, though, the stations are different. I mean, it's.
Your example is very important because, when you say Paris to outskirts suburbs, the HSR trains do not stop. Once they have left Paris, they just go at maximum speed. They do not stop.
Right. Now, what's a little bit different, right, but I'm saying the point is that when we're talking about all these things that apply to high-speed, there's this high-speed rail service which starts in this area, but the actual tracks are not necessarily high-speed rail tracks. And so some of these things, it's a little bit of a strange kind of situation. But the second thing, I mean, and really I want to ask you some questions about lessons learned, but the other thing is that's a little bit strange about this area is that unlike Paris, where it really is the center is the center is the center, here we have a little bit, it's a little bit more spread out. But so this is just back to lessons learned. I mean, you've seen the French in action, you've seen the English in action, you've talked about now there are all these different signaling systems. Well, here we have, here we basically have nothing, so we can choose whatever we want. So I guess the first question is, like, if you could choose, on the signaling systems, on these kinds of things, if you could choose one thing now without having to make everything work with all the old stuff, what would you choose? And the second one is, what are the things that you think what were the strengths of the way the different governments sort of worked and operated? And especially I know you're on the operating side really now, but on the construction side, on the Eurotunnel side, which had a lot of issues with construction, I know, like, what are the things you would who would you tell us to emulate, and what are those, what are the specific things?
Pretty wide agenda here. If in any manner you wanted to have a combination of HSR services and more regional services, but at least to minimize complexity, you would have to have electrified regional tracks as a minimum. Otherwise, you're
at the same voltage.
Yeah, well, yes, because if and when a successful HSR operator decides that commercially speaking, he would also want to go through the peninsula, at least the infrastructure would be there already and compatible. If you do not have electrified lines along the peninsula, I mean, you are just saying, forget it forever, right? And going with the electrification goes your other point, signaling system. So these are the minimum things you might want to have if there is a reasonable chance that someday HSR trains would go all the way up to downtown San Francisco.
So, but as far as keeping I mean, we've looked at very different levels of costs. In the English costs seem to be higher than the French costs.
5 times more.
5 times more. So what's driving that, and how can you get closer to French costs?
What's driving that is the fact that we built a 220-some miles tunnel under the city of London. This is the driver.
So that's it. The rest of it, anything that was at grade was comparable cost.
The rest of it was comparable costs, yes. But that piece at the top was extremely expensive, yes.
20 miles.
20 miles.
That's still relatively cheap to compare to what we're doing even in the Central Valley at this point. Our costs are very, very high. I mean, the latest costs are coming in without electrification, without signaling, without trains, without a maintenance facility, without anything. I mean, they're at $70 million a mile.
I have not seen the details of the project, so it would be difficult for me to comment, but it's probably a high number. But I mean, I just cannot. Isn't it a 4-lane track?
Not in the Central Valley.
Not in the Central Valley? I don't know. I have not seen the details. Yeah, you had another question. Did I miss something? Did I cover everything?
What would you do, I mean, as far as governance goes, as far as anything? I mean, what are the hints to us and tips to us?
That's, I mean, it's tough for me to comment because I have not reviewed in details how you work here. I mean, that would be presumptuous for me to judge anything along that line. Yeah. There was a question here, yes.
You said through populated areas that the trains are placed in trenches.
Yeah.
What is the height and visibility of the catenary poles and wires?
Well, when it is in trenches, the catenaries are more or less, at ground. I mean, they are just at ground level or lower. Yes. Oh, yes.
Okay. Jean-Claude, thank you very much. Excellent.
Thank you. Thank you for all your questions.
We will ask Greg to keep your contact information because I'm sure we'll all want to call you every day.
No, he'll be available by whatever way, email for sure. He and I communicate daily in the email, and I guess I've sat through this presentation 7 times.
So you can give the presentation?
I could give it. In a lot of cases, I don't know what it means, but I could give it. But I think that in sitting here and thinking through this presentation 7 times, it begins to sink in what he's saying. I'm a little slow at times. But I think this 1-hour concept is one of the most dramatic changes. And the fact that there's 2 businesses rather than 1, that certainly, and I spent 6 years at the PUC trying to unbundle the electricity industry and the telecommunication industry, so I know how we did it, and it wasn't easy. But what he's saying is you need to unbundle the trains from the
decision-making process
and operations, because you can have a competitive business on the trains, and they're going to have 4 trains running into London from 4 different businesses. So I think that if you have a competitive model, that you'll get lower cost, lower rates, and your only driver would be competing with the airlines. That you've got to compete with the airlines, and if you don't, then you're not going to be profitable, and you're not going to get any new people. And this whole thing about where a train starts and stops, Jean-Claude thinks that the terminal should be at SFO rather than in the city. I mean, he thinks that should be considered anyway. So I'm not sure exactly. I don't understand it, but I think if we didn't ask the question, but I think he felt that, like at de Gaulle or Orly, where does it start now? The high-speed rail, the one that goes to Brussels.
Charles de Gaulle Airport.
Charles de Gaulle Airport. So I think he's saying that an airport has a viable starting point, maybe rather than the inner city, and it's just a matter of where you run the trains back and forth. But I think if the high-speed rail, the other thing that came to mind is if the high-speed rail stops in San Jose, then you're going to really eliminate the baby bullets,
right?
Because people would jump on the high-speed rail unless there was a price problem. But I think that's a risk. The Caltrain would be susceptible to losing a lot of business if the high-speed rail stopped in San Jose. So I think those are some of the thoughts I got just sitting here trying to apply what he's saying to our local situation.
Thank you.
And thank you again for letting him speak.
Oh, of course.
The reason he's talking about it at the airport, which is what my husband says all the time when he's traveling, is because it's like, if you look at it like a plane, it has to be there so that you can interconnect. You're not going to want to take a people mover over to who knows where, Millbrae, to, you know what I mean? It has to be there where, like an airplane.
Well, and the other point you made earlier about the geographics of California being less dense, I think if you consider it as an airline, that is not to me, that's not a factor, because you've got LA and San Francisco side by side now with a high-speed rail running in 2 hours. So that the distances are no longer, you're bringing California together, because people are going to commute from downtown Palo Alto or downtown San Francisco to LA every day and work in LA, or vice versa. So when you bring the world smaller, then you lose the geography disadvantage that you're. Oh, yeah, absolutely. If I were in business like I was 20 years ago, I'd be taking that train 2 to 3 times a week to L.A.
You still have ridership.
And I would work 2 hours each way, and that's what they're doing between Lyon and Paris today, and other stops between London and Paris. People adopt. They've got high-speed rail, they've got internet, they've got cellular phones, they've got power, electric power. You're working at your desk for 2 hours. You don't care whether you're in your office or whether you're on the train. And if you've got important location, like Jean-Claude does, he lives in Paris and works in London. So, but he has to do that because his only job is in London. He doesn't want to give up his home in Paris.
Thanks, Craig.
So, I mean, you're bringing the world together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Pat, it's got to be quick.
I'm being real quick.
We're looking at a lunchtime due date.
I would like to say that after listening to all kinds of presentations, especially from Mr. Doty, who said the beauty of high-speed rail is I can get on in Paris, and the next thing I know, I'm in city center London. He never said I get on at the airport outside of Paris. So we're looking at a lot of mass seduction that's coming from Peninsula Rail, and I think, you know, if it took this long to open up my eyes, and I've been here for 3 years.
Thank you, Pat. Yeah. Okay, so we have the letter on the agenda, and then everything else will get moved. Does anybody want to talk about the letter? I mean, that's probably time sensitive enough, so we don't want to push that, right?
I'll just make my comment.
Yeah, please.
That we're adopting the letter. I presented it at our last council meeting. We're going to vote on it on Tuesday. So, but it will be personalized for Belmont, and we'll have another bullet about ethics and a couple of other changes that we're making, but it's essentially the same.
And will you share that with us?
Sure.
When you send it? And likewise, Burlingame considered this letter, and our council and community felt it was really important to separate the Caltrain from the high-speed rail in the letter. And it's going to be reworded in a way that says something to the effect that if HSR does use the Caltrain corridor, so that we weren't accepting it as a given, but wanted to preface it that way. And Councilman Brownrigg and Mayor Nagel are going to finalize that letter for our council to incorporate that point.
Seppi.
Yes, and our comments are going to be followed by hopefully Monday or Tuesday, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Jerry.
Our rail committee looked at the letter, and we won't sign on to the present letter. We feel very strongly that the Caltrain and the high-speed rail issues ought to be separate, and not accept the fact at this point, for several reasons, that high-speed rail will be using the Caltrain corridor. And it seems to us also that the one key issue that ought to be stressed right now with Governor Brown is the ridership issue, and that the other items that are mentioned are really, another level of concern. And with the governor given as many things as he's going to have to deal with, if we can get that one thing dealt with at his level, that yes, there should be a new ridership model, then that would be a big step forward.
Thanks, Jerry. Our subcommittee looked at it. We had similar comments. I do want to make the chief point that getting this letter out and this, the speed that you did, this helps. This is how we get things done here. We've talked a lot about letters in the past, and it takes forever. So us being able to react to it, I think, is a huge benefit, and that's probably the model we should start taking, is start getting letters written and then get them to everybody. We're probably going to take a lot of the content, but we may actually phase it and ask about ridership specifically, and maybe even separate the Caltrain on our first letter. But the content, I think we're going to use again on a second letter or a third letter that focuses the issues, because I think we want to bang on ridership almost solely right now, with the leadership in the state.
I forgot this part. We did review it with our community committee, on ad hoc committee, and one thing they wanted to do was make it a lot crisper and stronger, because they thought it needed more, like punch. So we will make those changes. But again, some of the points we are going to move forward with, especially the alternatives, because that's a real sticking point for everybody, that we are really left with one alternative, which is not really an alternative.
May I? I'd like to piggyback on what Kathy just was mentioned. I like the item number 5 that talks about EIR, and all alternative means must be studied. And you, on the third line, you have said our city. If this is a letter that we all need to sign, I think.
It's intended that each city would send it separately.
Oh, got it. Yes, got it. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, and thank you for doing it, Pat. I really
and
appreciate
that's
it.
why it's left up to each city to tailor it the way they like.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be verbatim, and
No.
so each of us wanted to stress. In fact, we're going to name the alternatives we want studied. Instead of just saying those alternatives, we're going to say tunnel, covered trench. So that was the other clarification.
That's great.
But I think it's a good letter.
So the other items that are on here are housekeeping. We can do these in January, at the January meeting, and I do want to just make sure everybody knows we're going to agendize it. We have to look at our calendar. Burlingame is up, I think, on the rotation.
Yes, we're ready to do
Our
it.
next meeting will be on the 7th, is what I think is probably most appropriate in Burlingame. And then at that time, we will talk about the chair, vice chair rotations, and get into the calendaring. We talked about monthly or twice a month still, and do those things. But that's stuff we can do. It's not mission critical. We do it.
Yes, we will see you in Burlingame on January 7th, 501 Primrose Road.
One final comment.
Please.
I just wanted to make a comment. This is back from the presentation. I was really struck after seeing this presentation that what we're not doing here, and we shouldn't be doing it here because we're talking about our own issues, but in the United States, we're treating high-speed rail as a piecemeal project. Each state, each region, and we can't do that. It's just folly, to do that. And I think what we have to be doing and sending the message to our legislators is that we need to start looking at this from the top down, because we're going to run into all these interoperability issues that we've seen the lessons learned in Europe, and we don't want to do that. That's going to be added expense, and to really serve the country, we've got to do it all together.
Well, the Las Vegas to Los Angeles, I don't think it's compatible with the San Francisco to LA. So, I mean, right here in California, we got to make sure it's compatible.
Thank you.
I think we need to make arrangement for Mr. Guez to make this presentation.
In Sacramento.
I mean, truly.
I actually think in D.C. would be very helpful.
We need to educate
to be
even the
honest with
people.
Right.
We made offers to a lot of people, and we're meeting with Senator Smitty and staff this afternoon.
Excellent.
Great.
Good.
Greg,
yeah.
thank you, by the
Thank you.
way,
Yeah,
for
yeah.
orchestrating all of this and bringing this
Yeah, we
knowledge.
talked to Carol Broom yesterday, the president of the Board of County Supervisors, and we met with the Rail Committee, we met with the Chamber Transportation Committee, Redwood City and Menlo.
Jerry Hill's representative was here. Maybe we can write to him too and get him on board.
Right, and certainly we'll have the DVD, and I've heard this thing 7 times. I can make the presentation, but I'll have to call Jean-Claude for some of the answers. So.
Well, the accent's
Thank you.
good too.
Yeah.
Well, I can listen to it 7 times. It was very entertaining. Thank you.
Okay. We're going to adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everybody. We're adjourned. Yeah, you too.